Pat helped to find the Northwest Radiation Health Alliance and has served in the Hanford Health Information Network, resigning from that position in protest of inadequate efforts on behalf of the Hanford Downwinders. Her health continues to be impacted as a Hanford Downwinder. She is our friend. She is an activist. Please help me welcome Patricia Hoover to the stage today.
Good evening. So glad you're all here. As Kurt said in that very nice introduction, I'm here to offer a perspective from the U.S. side of the nuclear bombings in Japan, the production side, and following our theme tonight of the unequal impacts of nuclear weapons. I have several instances I'd like to share with you. Before Hanford was even built, nine Native American tribes were displaced from the area. 9. Their fishing grounds, their hunting grounds, their sacred sites that were so important to the culture of those Native Americans were taken away with that huge installation. 625 square miles is the size of the Hanford facility, half the size of Rhode Island. That's one sample of the inequities. Before the first reactor was ever put online to begin producing the plutonium, we needed uranium. The uranium was in mines in the Four Corners area of the West on Native American lands. So the Native Americans were hired to do the mining, to pull that uranium out of the ground. The uranium they called the yellow dirt. And they were never told how toxic it was, how radioactive, how bad it was for their health and the health of their families and all the tribes that lived around that mining. After we bombed Japan twice with atomic weapons, for some reason our country had to keep testing more nuclear weapons. So we tested out in the Nevada desert, and we brought Army men to come out and stand and watch the detonations, the mushroom clouds go up and be covered with radiation. These Army personnel were soldiers. They were loyal, patriotic men who were following the orders of their commanding officers. They too were highly irradiated. Those are our atomic veterans. We continued to test weapons out in the Pacific Ocean, in the Marshall Islands. That indigenous group of people in those small islands and atolls out in the Pacific, they too were displaced. Many of them were taken off their home islands and moved to other islands, some never to go back. Their islands were considered sacrifice zones. Another indigenous community with toxic radioactive emissions, health effects. Those are just a few of the inequities of nuclear weapons. For me personally, as a woman, the inequities were very, very great for women because women carry the children for 9 months when they become pregnant. And plutonium and all the highly toxic byproducts of producing plutonium, ruthenium, cesium, many, many chemical toxic elements, target the reproductive glands. So As Kurt said, I've been active for almost 30 years. I've networked with downwinders all over the Northwest at other nuclear production sites around the United States. I had the privilege of working with anti-nuclear activists from the Soviet Union who had come here on an exchange. To a number, the activists always talk about the women who became pregnant hoping to start a family, and time after time there were miscarriages and spontaneous abortions. If the baby was carried to term, there would be birth defects, horrendous birth defects. I have so many stories of women who carried 5 children to term and they all died. 4 children, 3. One of my best friends in Walla Walla had 7 babies brought to term. One, the brains were on the outside of the skull. One had no limbs. One had a stroke as soon as it came out of the birth canal. These stories of women's terrible birth outcomes are a product of our nuclear weapons production. If you want visual proof, go to Pasco, Washington. That's one of the 3 cities, the Tri-Cities, across the Columbia River, just downriver from the Hanford Nuclear Plant. Pasco Cemetery has a section called the Baby Cemetery. And you can walk through that and see headstone after headstone after headstone. Baby John, born one day, died the next. Baby Susie, born one day, maybe died the same day. An entire baby cemetery of headstones of lost children. I think by the women having to do the birthing and carrying a child for 9 months really is inequitable. We do have male downwinders who became sterile from the same reproductive problems, from the same radioactive elements, but the women really suffered. On a personal note, I have one sibling. She had 3 spontaneous abortions and was never able to have children. I was never able to have children. My family ends when my sister and I die. My parents never had the joy or the pleasure of seeing grandchildren's soccer game, or go to a concert, a recital, a graduation, or a wedding. And speaking of my parents, who were also downwinders, they died 10 weeks apart of 4 different radiogenic illnesses. My mother had a blood disease called ITP. I won't give you the long medical terminology, but ITP, that was the blood disease that the majority of the cleanup workers at Chernobyl all got and died from. These are just a few examples of the health effects of radiation. And there are reasons why I was so proud this year to join Oregon PSR when they presented a resolution to the Oregon legislature.
Hey.
It's called Senate Joint Memorial 5. And it was a resolution basically saying Oregonians want to support all the treaties for nuclear prohibition, non-proliferation. It's a wonderful document that Kelly Campbell and the staff of Oregon PSR put together. They collaborated with peace and justice and healthcare groups all over Oregon. They started in January and they went through a committee in the Senate, the full Senate, a committee in the House. We were afraid that it would become one of those legislative items that goes in the round file before the session ended, but it passed. We are the second state, yes, positive. We're the second state in the nation to have such a resolution. There's copies out on the table. You're welcome to have your own copy when you leave. It's a terrific historical document with lots of information about why Oregonians want to stop the threat of global nuclear warfare. And part of this, I'll read part of this resolution fits tonight's theme. Whereas the mining, milling, production, testing, storage, and use of nuclear weapons disproportionately affects communities of color, indigenous people, and women. That's one of the phrases in this joint memorial. I'm very proud of Oregon PSR. I'm proud to be a member of Oregon PSR and the work they did to get this passed. And California was the first. We are the second nation, and I have to say, our resolution is much stronger than Californians. We mention the vets, we mention the downwinders, we mention the Marshallese, we mention all the inequities in nuclear warfare. And I want to read you one other line from this document, because we're honored tonight to have with us someone mentioned in this document. It says, whereas Oregon has been home to many courageous people who have dedicated their lives to the eradication of nuclear weapons, including Carol Erner, who organized the first Hiroshima commemoration in Portland in 1962. That is 57 years ago, and she's with us tonight. Give Carol a big hand. Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. So, I have stood before you sharing a bit of my Downwinder story. I want to continue to stand with you for a nuclear-free future.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat. Let's give Pat another round of applause for her courage, her words, and her activism that inspires us today. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, today's event rides that momentum. I gotta say it again, of Oregon PSR's campaign for Senate Joint Memorial 5. Let's give another round of applause. Oregon's leading the way. Exactly. Exactly, Train. And I ask you, Train, I ask you 3 questions. Because Sean always tells me to be critical. Who profits from these weapons? Who are they tested on? Who do they affect? Today, there are more than 13,850 nuclear weapons, most even with more destructive power than those dropped, that we commemorate today. Enough is enough. Nuclear abolition is the only safe solution. Remember Hiroshima. Remember Nagasaki. Remember Hanford. Remember the Marshall Islands. Remember West Shoshone of Nevada. Remember radioactive waste on Cherokee land. Remember the atomic veterans. Remember the children unborn. Remember women who suffer at the greedy white men who profit from these weapons of destruction. Remember mothers.
Amen. Amen.
Remember Mother Earth as she cries today. At this moment in time, I invite each and every single one of you to share in a moment of reflection, of reflective action. If our speakers and our representatives could join me at the stage today, so Michiko, as well as the Edmos, I'm going to invite them to stand to my right, and I'm going to now invite you all to join us as well in an action at your seats. We are going to share with you an action that Chisao Hata, an Oregon Nikkei community organizer and artist, has designed for us today. Let me walk you through the steps. I used to be a high school teacher, and important things are instructions. So here are the instructions. You will take 3 breaths. Let's practice that. You're good at breathing, aren't you? We will also raise our hands. Let's practice that. I hope you wore deodorant. I will say three phrases, and it will look something like this. We will breathe. We will breathe and raise our hands. I will say a statement, you'll keep your hands up, and then we'll breathe and bring our hands down. We'll breathe to center ourselves. We'll raise our hands to the sky, and we'll bring our hands down to the earth. Here we go. Breathe in. Together, we protect the land. Breathe in. Together, we activate all people. One last time. Together, we protect the land and activate all people to create peace for generations to come. Thank you, speakers. You may be seated.